Digestive part 3. Let's talk about the intestines. And this is our last of the digestive system. After this, we're done with the digestive system. Okay, so we're going to look at the gross anatomy of the system. First off, small intestines. It's the major organ of digestion and absorption. It runs from the pyloric sphincter, which is the point where it goes from the stomach to the small intestines, all the way down to the ileocecal valve where it joins up with the large intestines. Overall, looking about 6 feet or 6 meters, aka 20 feet in humans. It's a pretty long organ. If you remember from our dissection activities, remember how long the small intestines was every time. It's no surprise that it's this long here. It shouldn't be, hopefully anyway. The diameter is pretty small, but it has a lot of surface area for absorption, so it doesn't need to have a massive diameter. And I want to point out the picture on the right is not real small intestines being gouged out of somebody. It is a movie prop from the movie Tropic Thunder. So it is a fake thing. Alright, subdivision of this joker. The duodenum. Mentioned it already. It is one of the shorter sections of it, and it's the first part of the small intestines. It has the most kind of unique features to it. It's where like a lot of like the cool beginning stuff comes in, or the pancreas things, the bile comes in, all that kind of stuff. Then we have the jejunum. This is 8 feet long approximately, and then we have the ileum, which is the last 12 feet of it, and the ileum joins up with the large intestines at the ileocecal valve, where it joins up the ileum and the cecum. And it's weird. So the large intestines can be like a little bit overall larger in diameter than the small intestine. So here we go. You can actually see the overall all the structure of the alimentary canal, and then we can also see the specific large intestines and small intestines joints. What makes them up? So there's our, again, the duodenum we can see, and you can see where it gets kind of like cool and specific, you know, some neat, unique things coming in with a hepatopancreatic sphincter and all that sort of stuff. You can also see where the jejunum begins. So the duodenum is really a pretty short section. But now you're probably wondering, hey, who has got the longest intestines out there for any animal, right? This is a good question. So, I mean, honestly, if you think about it, I think one of the more interesting things is maybe like per body size to think about it, per body length. But the sperm whale and the blue whales have up there is the highest. So sperm whale 150 meters, blue whale 220 meters, which is a ton of small intestines inside those jokers. But compared to the overall body length, it's only about 7 to 8 times. So if you want to look at actual body length, the cow has got everybody whipped. About 40 meters in length, and this is 20 times their body length. So they eat a lot of grass. They need a lot of intestines to break everything down and eat it and handle it. And so they got one of the longest ones. So that's pretty cool, I think. So blue whale or cow, kind of the better answers there. In terms of humans, our intestines is about 4 to 6 times our body length. So we're not up there as that impressive of a total. So the small intestines, what's the point? The main job of this thing is to have an increased surface area to absorb nutrients from food. So the surface area is, again, the size of a tennis court, right? Massive surface area. And there's modifications that pave the way for this that allow to increase the surface area and increase the points at which things can be absorbed. These modifications are all about increasing surface area. That's always the theme. If you have any real organ that's involved with trying to absorb things, is you want to increase the surface area possible to allow more absorption to take place. Maximize the space that you have. Some of these adaptations, or you can see up there, so we're going to look at some of them in person. On the picture, it shows you like so there's like little individual folds to it. So when the chyme moves through, it just rolls all the way around. These like a long slide that just never ends. And you have the villi projections and the microvilli projection. So circular folds, these are permanent folds that are found inside. They're not like the stomach folds, which can be stretched or expanded and go away. These are permanent, and they force a slow spiral through to make it last longer. So when we see this little slide on the right in the picture, it's like, okay, you can go straight down and be out of there in 2 seconds, right over, or you can do the long loopy loop around, and it takes much longer to get through, and it's a much more enjoyable of a ride. That's the case here with this joker. And that's how it works. We got villi, little projections that come off the mucosa. They have a capillary bed for absorption, also have lacteals for absorption of the fats. And so just little tiny projections that pop off of the mucosa to increase absorption. And then you have microvilli, which are tiny little extensions off of the villi themselves. And so that's pretty interesting. So it's tiny little things that come off, and they give an idea of this brush border. It kind of just looks like a hairbrush. You know, those little tiny little things that come off of that. And again, job is to increase absorption. These things contain enzymes that help do the final bit of digestion as needed for some macromolecules and help absorb them in the body. And so here's a one that shows you the circular folds and the villi, so you get a feel for how those look. On the villi, really up close, would be the microvilli. And so here you can see an intestinal crypt where things get trapped inside of there. You can see the villi as they're present, those overall structures, and then you see the goblet cells which secrete mucus to allow for easier passageways. And so here you can actually see a more zoomed in version of it, and you can actually see the microvilli, and so even more of it. So it's crazy how what they have all done to increase the surface area, to slow down the speed at which it'll go through the small intestines to absorb food. So look at their anatomy of the structures, right? We looked at the stomach. It's got its own stuff. Well, lo and behold, the small intestines does too. So here, the mucosa and submucosa are the big ones that have been modified. And so one of the things that's come up, intestinal crypts. And these are big glands that are scattered. These have big glands that are kind of scattered between the villi. So those little projections that come off, those little crypts. Within the crypts, these little areas, you have 5 main types of cells. You have enterocytes, goblet cells, enteroendocrine cells, Paneth cells, and stem cells. So we're going to look at these things and see what they do. So here's a zoomed in version, so you can actually see the structure. It looks kind of like the stomach, right, with those gastric pits, but it's not. It's different, right? There's a villus structure, the villi that are present. You see the big green tube going up through it. That's the lacteal. It's the blood vessels going through. Again, small single-cell layer structure to allow for things to go in through and be absorbed. And pits where cells can be stored that actually have different functions to aid in this process. So it's different. You also see the zoomed in version that shows the microvilli and where it's found. So the first of these cells is the enterocytes. This is the bulk of the cells. It covers the outer layer of these villi and the crypt regions. Basic columnar type cells, tight junctions to allow things to not get in. So it's just it forms a tight barrier, so nothing gets through that doesn't need to. And then so the main function is to absorb things. Again, that's the function of the small intestines. So the enterocytes, the main common cell found there, their main job is to absorb crap. So it can get things into the body. And you also have crypts that produce their own kind of juice. But the juice in this case isn't like a super acidic to try and break it down, but more just something to help act as a carrier to help carry the chyme throughout the entire process. It's more like a mucousy, watery type mixture. And now we have more cells. We have the goblet and enteroendocrine cells. Goblet cells are mucus-secreting cells. They're found all in the epithelial layer, the outer layer. You can see them highlighted in the picture. Main job, make mucus. Then you have endocrine cells, which are also involved with hormone release. And so we've talked about those before. Those are found mostly in the villus, but sometimes in the crypts too. And they'll release any sort of hormone that's involved with this process. And then we have Paneth cells. These are found in the crypts. These are ones that help with defense. So these are defense ones. And so these have spots so they can destroy bacteria that have somehow managed to survive this whole process. So you have some things that get inside of you that maybe don't need to be there. These cells ideally can help get rid of all that to prevent anything from taking hold. And then we have stem cells. And so stem cells are pretty obvious. They just keep dividing and replacing all these other old cells. The villi themselves, the entire epithelium of the villus is replaced every few days. So it sticks around and it goes away. So it's constantly being replenished along the way. So fast-growing cells is kind of the point. And so note, even though we have the immune system, but think about all these different structures still that are around to help deal with fighting off infections inside the body. So all kinds of cells that do this. And so it's just kind of neat to see even more like immune stuff pop up. And so like we have all these systems, got T and B cells, right? But you still have like the small intestines with its own little personal security force to help out. All right, more things with it. It also has some malt tissue, so that helps prevent off, it's building up on that same theme of protection, that help fight off against things that don't need to be there. You can have these individual lymphoid follicles. You can have Pyrus patches that are there. And so it kind of depends on where you're looking at, but here in this picture, those little big purple areas, the Peyer's patch. And you can also have the submucosa. And so something else that it has is duodenal glands, which secrete mucus to help break down prevent the chyme from causing damage. So again, a lot of mucus being made in the small intestines to prevent damage. And we also have like bile being made, right? And that helps deal with the acid damage from the stomach. So you don't want these systems to get destroyed, these intestines to get destroyed. So what's kind of cool is, we have these little glands that secrete mucus inside of us, and frogs have that, especially on their skin. And they have some glands that can actually go through and release poison and sometimes it's made from things they eat. So they can, from the foods they eat in their environment, they can actually take some of those compounds that they can process in their intestines and then put that into their own body and make poison out of it and make themselves more harmful for predators. So it's kind of cool. Doesn't seem we can do that, which is very disappointing. I wish I could eat a bug, and next thing you know, my skin's toxic or something. Sweet. Anyway, so rapidly dividing cells, right? Chemotherapy targets rapidly dividing cells. We have those in the stomach and in the small intestines. So, if you're trying to deal with cancer, which is rapidly dividing, one of the ways you deal with that is with chemotherapy, which destroys those. But you're also going to, as a side effect, you're going to destroy the ones in the GI tract because those are getting replenished constantly too. So this explains some of the side effects you see with chemotherapy that people have to deal with, such as the vomiting, diarrhea, and nausea. It's because you're losing some of those cells and suffering consequences from that. So it's kind of neat to see that connection and understand more about why people can feel that way if they have to deal with that. All right, intestinal juice, a lot of juices, none of them tasty, which is a shame. But there's a couple, there's an amount of this made every day. It depends on how irritated it is and how stretched it is, depending on how full it is. So the more you eat, the more juice is made, and vice versa. And so one of the main things that causes it reduced is if really just depends on the chyme content. What's in that chyme will determine how much juice is made. The juice itself is more basic, and so, just to counteract the acidity of it, a lot of water, some mucus in it, and then the structures of the intestines we just talked about are involved with making of that mucus. So the duodenal glands, the submucosa, the goblet cells of the mucosa. And the actual small intestines, chyme, it'll come in and it'll contain the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that need to be broken down and absorbed, that have been broken down mostly and need to be absorbed. It takes a few hours for the small intestines to absorb all the nutrients and the water, because like water gets dumped out and then it also gets sucked back in. So you need to try not to lose too much water in this. The enzymes for digestion, so bile comes from that. Pancreas plays a role, the liver plays a role with the bile, and then also the brush border enzymes of the microvilli. All those places carry the enzymes that actually help finalize the digestive process in the small intestines. And so here's a nice table that summarizes all the functions of the gastrointestinal tract. So I think that's a cool little table, something where we've been so far, and then what we're talking about now, and then where we're going. So it's just kind of neat. So it sums everything up. So you need a quick hits table. This shows you all of it. So that's it for the small intestines. It's a little simpler compared to the stomach. Main job is just absorption. Large intestines is a little more, it's pretty basic too. But it's got some, uniqueness to it that makes it different. So it has the Tenei coli. And so these are bands of muscle in it to help pump the foodstuffs that's in there, or the waste that's left over out of it. It also has Hostra, which is little pocket-like sacs, and so these can contract, also help push food along. Then you have these appendages, which are these fat-filled pouches, and we don't know what they do. So, yeah. The first part of the small and large intestines is called the cecum. So there's several different little divisions here of the large intestines. Also got the appendix, which is right off near the beginning of the large intestines, and this it stores bacteria, and it helps. So that's why it can get inflamed, right? Because it's storing bacteria. So it makes sense this thing could go rogue on you. But the idea is gut bacteria is very important, and we're continuing to learn its importance. And so this actually keeps some of your gut bacteria, and then it can help recolonize your gut as needed, ideally when necessary. Obviously, I mean, it's going to have mixed results depending on what's going on, and you can live perfectly fine without it, but it's a lymphoid type structure. And we talked about that too with lymphatic system, what it can do. So, but be on the test, so yeah, it all covers together. You never would have guessed the lymphatic system would come up again, but yeah, there it is. Also, the colon. There's a few regions. So once you get past the cecum, the opening point, you go into the colon. And so there's the ascending and transverse colon. And so the ascending colon goes up the right side of the body, and then it goes across to the other side of the body via the transverse colon. And then it goes down the descending colon, and then makes a little twist shape going through the middle of the body via the sigmoid colon. And then it eventually will hit the rectum, and then out the body via the anal canal. So that's the end of the large intestines. So it's definitely small in the small intestines. It's got these different subdivisions to it. You should know the subdivisions and recognize like the path that it would take through. Like, okay, which one's going to be hit first, which one's last, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's a little simpler, I think. And there it is in form, so you can see some of those extra things. Some like the appendages on there, the tinea, the haustra are seen, the appendix is seen. So yeah, there's some interesting things there. And here's like the whole system. So you got all the structures we've kind of talked about. Well, a good chunk of the structures we've talked about anyway. And there's more. So actually the actual the like the little omentums and all that kind of stuff in there too. The mesentery, the mesocolon we talked about. So yeah, it's kind of cool just looking at some of that intestines. Intestines is weird. It looks like sausage. I'm not a big sausage fan, so I do without it. Every time I see like sausage rolled up in a ball, though, it looks like large intestines and small intestines to me. All right. So the large intestines, we didn't really talk about this, but the main job of the large intestines is to reabsorb water. So that's the main job of the large intestines. It's not really involved with digestion or absorbing nutrients. It's all about reabsorbing water. And so it's like one of the last stops. So its main function is to harden up the food that's going, the waste products that are going through. So what's left, and then reabsorb water so you don't waste it. But I think that'll come up when we talk about some of the problems later on. But one of the things that's going on though inside your GI tract is bacterium. There's a lot of different types of bacteria that are found there, tons of it. And so they colonize the colon especially. And so it's one of the key things that's found inside the colon. And so it helps with that. So fermentation can occur here. And so like some things can actually, just where gas can be produced. And so some things that didn't get digested for some reason or another, they will ferment in these spots, which can lead to acids and gases getting released, which can cause various effects. But that's where it comes from, is the large intestines. So that's where problems can be come from in those spots. So it's just kind of neat to think about. It's like, yeah, you got some bacteria in there and food just going through, something ain't quite digested right. Next thing you know, got a bunch of gas being made. Uncomfortable, for sure. And so other things that goes on inside the bacterial flora, they can make vitamins. And so that can be used by the body, and they also help keep bad bacteria in check. So you don't have a bad bacterial infection take rise. So by having a healthy, your own natural bacteria in it, in that community itself, just keeping it together, it helps prevent bad bacteria from getting established to help keep you healthy. And so anything that tries to breach through and get through your system, the body will destroy. So there's systems in place to prevent this lining from being exposed to bacteria that could cause you harm, ideally, right? I mean, there's always exceptions. The bacteria is, pretty challenging, is able to and relentless, but at least you have something there. So that's why it's important. Always people talk about like gut bacteria and gut health and keeping out the bad by having a good supply of good, that sort of thing. A lot of growing talk lately about the importance of bacteria and how it can affect. And so there's tons of new research going on about how it can be very influential on us, including weight and then just other disease relationships and then mood. And so it turns out gut bacteria is going to be one of the big things. It already is, and it's continue being this way going forward. That helps, we're going to understand better, hopefully, and be able to manipulate that better. So we can just be a little overall healthier. It's like yogurt, right? Big probiotic thing. And so people's like, oh, I want some probiotics. I want to get those things, then you can take probiotics that can help. potentially, right? And so this is one of those big time growing areas around. So one thing we've talked about is how long food stays in each of these structures. So stomach about 4 hours, small intestines, 6 or more. Large intestines, it can be 12 to 24 hours. So it's not that long. It takes forever to get through here. No food breakdown happens here unless there's some sort of bacteria inside the system that happens to digest something. And then mostly water is reclaimed, but also some electrolytes, which is why if you have diarrhea, one day you can lose a lot of electrolytes and water. And so that's why, because the large intestines is one of those that helps keep those inside the body. But in this case, you're losing them. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I apologize for the yawn. And so also any vitamins that are made by those bacteria can be reabsorbed too. So the major function is to move food along and absorb those things we just talked about. So it's very interesting functions, very important functions, but also very interesting. And you can have your large intestines reduced via surgery and be okay. You would just, obviously you would have less surface area to actually absorb these things we just looked at. So you have some of that decrease, but you can be fine. My second cousin is missing most of his large intestines, if not all of it at this point, due to Crohn's disease. We had to have it removed. So yeah, that can be kind of rough. My mom has Crohn's disease, but she doesn't have had any of that removed yet. Hopefully it doesn't happen. They haven't mentioned that at all. I think that's more of an old treatment because he had it a long time ago. That was much more like 90s, early thousands thing. One of the disorders you can have, the GI tract, is irritable bowel syndrome. And so a variety of reoccurring symptoms that can come up. One thing that can lead to it is stress. So stress is overall not great for the body. It's a common factor that can lead to IBS. And so if you have it, one of the most important things to do is manage stress. Otherwise it can get pretty severe pretty quickly. And so also you can have other various triggers too, like foods you can eat, you can have sensitivities to. So all that kind of stuff can pop up too. But yes, stress is try not to stress too much. It can be harmful for you. Another part of the large intestines is the actual process of defecation, and it's getting feces out of the body. All right, otherwise you have too much things being built up in you, and you got to get rid of it somehow. All right, animals do it. Everything has a system to get rid of waste. Either it's just a sponge. Something has something to get rid of waste products in some capacity. The most basal of organisms. Some groups actually don't have two separate openings. They just have one opening that serves the mouth and anus, which is pretty interesting. But that's a very different types of organisms. Like a flatworm has that, but if you don't know what a flatworm is, it doesn't really help you that much. But as the feces moves towards the rectum area, it will get larger and experience distension, so it's being stretched. That'll indicate the defecation reflex, which signals to the brain is like, hey, something needs to happen here. The parasympathetic plays a role in it. So again, rest and relaxation is involved in that system. Again, times of stress, maybe not the time to defecate. If you're getting chased by a bear or something, it's like want to ignore that. But the parasympathetic controls the relaxation of the sphincter and also helps stimulate the contraction of those colons. So the sigmoid is the one right near the rectum and the rectum itself to cause that final push of things through and try and get it out the door, so to speak. But there is conscious control of this. So you have one that kind of controls it with the parasympathetic system that can relax it, but then there's also the external sphincter that's consciously controlled, which is good. So you can have control over these sorts of things. So you can choose, when the time is right for you. So during that whole process, the muscles will contract to expel. And if you have something like diarrhea, that's where the time to the large intestines does not happen it's happened too fast, which means it has not had enough proper time to absorb all the water that's left, and so it can be that's why it is the way it is. The more you know. Again, a lot of practical relevance, I think, in this chapter. That's why I like it. You can learn a lot of things about the body, and some things people experience or go through, can talk about. It's like, hey, I know where this happens. It may not be something you want to talk about with people, but hey, at least you know about it, and that's kind of cool. It just makes you more knowledgeable about how you work. Anyway, digestion. Looking at the physiology behind digestion a little bit. We're done with the large intestines. So for things to get ingested into the system, you have to break down the foods into smaller portions. We've mentioned this, right? Those enzymes to break them down to small enough quantities so they move across the membrane. When there's lactose intolerance, right, you can't break down the glucose sugar into its the lactose sugar into its macromolecules or micromolecules to the small little subsections, the monosaccharides. So you can't absorb them. So it has to be a small enough portion to get across the membrane. And so with digestion, it's this process that goes through and breaks down these macromolecules into monomers so you can actually get them into the body. So a lot of enzymes are involved in this. They carry out hydrolysis, so they add water to break the bonds. That's why water plays an important role in this. So water is released into the small intestines to help lead the way for this. So you can actually use the water with those enzymes to break those food items down. Which is why the large intestines is needed so you can able to reabsorb all that water. Any water you may have taken in by drinking or anything, and so you don't lose all of it. So you want to keep that with you. So yeah, man, some ice cream sounds good. I'm still thinking about that milkshake I saw in the previous lecture. And so, how does things get absorbed? And so what happens is the opening, the lumen of the intestines, of the GI tract, you want to take the things inside of that and get it into the body. There's a process to allow that you don't just absorb this willy-nilly, but you have tight junctions to make sure the proper channels are used and actually absorb all this stuff. So it doesn't just dip into the body. And so they have to pass through the epithelial cells and get processed and absorbed and go where they need to go, and not just go right into the tissues. So that's good. Some molecules have to be moved by passive or transport, others by active. So it takes energy to absorb some of these. Others, they just go right across. It just depends on what it is you're trying to absorb. With carbohydrates, you have to have monosaccharides to be absorbed. So if it's a disaccharide or a polysaccharide of some kind, you got to break that thing down. So starches, right? If you love potatoes, french fries, something like that, well, you got to break that sucker down. Some other various sugars that they're broken down, so like lactose, maltose, sucrose, those kinds of disaccharides. You got to break them down into their mono parts, otherwise you can actually absorb them. Otherwise, it won't work. And so again, lactose intolerance, you don't have the enzyme to break it down lactose, problems arise. I once had a student tell me that she fought through lactose intolerance. It's like, you know what, I just fought through it and I'm fine now. I was like, you know what, that's interesting. So maybe there's hope. Just deal with it and maybe you can be okay. I don't know if that's a thing or not. Maybe she thought she did and she actually didn't. I don't know. But it was interesting. You hear a lot of stuff. That was years and years ago now, but yeah, it was wild. But anyway, so the main job is you want to get into monosaccharides like a glucose or a fructose, so you can actually absorb that into the body. Otherwise, it's too big and won't make it through. So, problems. All right. And going back to the lactose intolerance, so you can have like painful gas and all that sort of stuff. And it's because you have excess sugar in the large intestines where the bacteria can use it and ferment, boom, problems, right? So, ouch. Here's carbohydrate digestion. So you can see what goes along. So for each one of these macromolecules, you should know the parts of the body that can play a role with breaking them down. So which parts make the enzymes? So where can carbohydrates be broken down at? Okay, small intestines, and that can be due to the pancreas and also the brush border enzymes, also the mouth, right? Those are the ones that deal with carbohydrates. You should know that for each one of these groups we look at. And so, we've talked about lactose intolerance a little bit. But yeah, so at this point you don't have enough lactase, so you can't break down lactose. Whatever is left stays undigested, creates gradients, and prevents water from being absorbed, which is another con. And so you also have all these undigested things leading right with bacteria for fermentation, into some of those uncomfortable problems. But then you also have the excess water staying in, not being absorbed due to concentration gradients, which causes diarrhea, and that's where it can be pretty rough. And so, yeah, that's not great you're losing water and not taking in sugar and having a bunch of gas and other painfulness happening as a result. So that's not so good. There's some tablets people can take, like lactase enzymes. You can add those in before consuming milk products. There's also various substitutes too. So there's some ways to get around it, which is not bad. I don't have lactose intolerance, luckily. Sometimes like some milk can like make me feel like a little uneasy. I mostly drink skim milk too. I don't know if that matters or anything, but I'm trying almond milk. I don't really care for it that much. I used it some last summer for smoothies, but that's about it. All right, so now let's break down proteins. So let's look at them. And so you need proteins for a variety of purposes, right? And so you need proteins to build up parts of the cell. They need to make for enzyme purposes. And so, yeah, you got to get all kinds of stuff involved to use these. And so proteins are eventually just broken down into their small amino acids. Sometimes some that are slightly paired up into like 2s or 3s, but then those get absorbed. But digestion for these begins in the stomach when pepsin is made, right? And then that gets deactivated once it hits into the small intestines. The pepsin does anyway. But so yeah, take these proteins, break them down, begins in the stomach. It's one of the big ones. Got to use. And here's another one. Also shows the small intestines can play a role with digestion too. And note that is through the pancreas, and then also again the brush border enzymes. So no mouth involved with breaking down proteins, right? So again, you got to know the differences between these different macromolecules and where they're broken down. All right, let's talk about lipids. Lipids are a little trickier because you have to emulsify them. And so some of these products are insoluble in water, so you have to treat them with bile salts. And the bile salts help break down the fat into smaller little globules, so actually be managed easier and actually put it into a process to where it can be absorbed. But digestion will take place from the pancreas. So it has enzymes to help go through and break down the fat into its monomers as best as it can. So it can actually be taken into the body. So these products will eventually get coated with bile salts again, and then will allow it to enter the lacteal, which is part of the lymphatic system. Remember, and then that eventually gets emptied into the blood. So, yeah, main job: emulsify it, break it down in some way, get that thing into the body, or break it down to its micromolecule, the monomers. That's it. Once the lipids are in the blood, those broken down pieces anyway are in the blood. The fatty acid chains and the glycerols, they're sorted out and used by the cells for whatever they need to do. So the short chain ones can actually go directly into the blood. So yeah, all we're trying to do with these fats is break them down to a usable form for the body. That's it. That's all the point is. So these long chains and long complicated forms, you throw in some bile salts with it, you mash it up a little bit, you can suck it in via the lacteal, and then you break it down further with enzymes so it can actually be used by the body. That's it. All right, so where does fat digestion take place? Mouth, stomach, small intestines. Small intestines via the pancreas, small intestines via bile, and the liver, stomach a little bit, but it's there, and then of course the mouth as well, minor. So 4 different spots. Well, 3, but one of them's caused by 2 different things. All right, then lastly, nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are contained in some food you eat, whether it's DNA and RNA, which is, well, food. You eat plants with DNA. So you have to have ways to break that down so we can have nucleotides. And so you use these enzymes, a lot of them from the pancreas, to break them down into their monomers, which are the nucleotides. And so brush border enzymes, they exist too, and they also help break these things down further. And so they'll break those nucleotides down into the nitrogenous bases, the sugars, and the ions, and the phosphate ions that are there. So these are small enough they can actually be taken in by the body and used for other various purposes. And so once these are broken down, they're actively transported into the body. So this is one that's actively transported. So it's a big difference so far. And so again, the process is the same for all 4 of these things. You take this larger molecule, you break the thing down into small pieces, then you take it into the body and use it for something. There's some various quirks in all of them that's different, and where they actually broken down at depends. But for digestion for the nucleic acids, small intestines only. And this is through the pancreas and the brush border enzymes, right? So we can see there's a clear difference in all 4 of these. Some overlap, some non-overlap. You should know those differences. All right, vitamins. Vitamins, people take them. I used to eat Flintstone vitamins. Now I just take a regular vitamin when I remember it. But vitamins are in a lot of foods we eat. And so these can be absorbed in the small intestines. And how they get absorbed depends on what type of vitamins they are. Some are just carried in. via various cells. Others require more just basic diffusion or active transport. And then others are absorbed by other more complicated mechanisms. And so the large intestines, you have that bacterial that lives there. The bacteria that lives there, they make vitamin K and B, and those get absorbed in that spot as well. So some of these help out various different things. Like vitamin A helps with teeth, bones, and soft tissue, skin. D helps out with that. B12 helps with nerve tissue, metabolism, and blood cells. The body doesn't make some of these, so that's directly taken in from the environment, which is why it's important. Vitamin C is always related to with colds, but I mean it's kind of there's not that much evidence necessarily for that. But I mean a lot of these things comes and goes. And then but vitamin C does help repair and regenerate tissues. So maybe that's it just helps you maybe deal with some of the after effects of it. So yeah, vitamins they do a lot of good things overall for the body. So you have to make sure you absorb them from the foods that you're eating, so your body can function properly. The electrolytes, these are ions. These are transported actively along the small intestines, and so these can be absorbed. So iron and calcium are absorbed in the duodenum. Sodium is absorbed with glucose and amino acids, so it's coupled with those together. And then the chloride ions, or chlorine ions, whatever that is, are transported actively as well. And then potassium, though, just goes along with water. And so if water reabsorption is poor, then you're going to lose a lot of potassium in the process. But usually, like whatever's in the intestines is what's going to be absorbed with these. So if it's in there, it's probably going to get taken in. But if you have a condition to where you're not having proper absorption time to take place and just shooting through the system, they're not going to be reabsorbed, so you can lose these and have to replenish them with treatment. So if you have the diarrhea, you have to lose all these things. You have to take it in. So iron and calcium are important. So how much of those is taken in depends on how much you need it. So they're of course related to like hemoglobin. So that's important. We've also talked about calcium, what that can be used for, a wide variety of things. As an ion that it's important for, but it's regulated by parathyroid hormone, remember that. And so also vitamin D. So it's related to bones and stuff, of course. So you got to have some of those things. And then water. Most of this, about 9 liters of water, are going to enter the small intestines, which is a lot throughout the entire process of it. Most of that gets reabsorbed by the small intestines. The rest of it gets absorbed by the large intestines. So it's just along the way, water is dumped into the small intestines, and then before all that stuff leaves the small intestines, it's reabsorbed. The large intestines finishes it out. And overall, the movement of water is helped guide along by active transport. So it helps you actively transporting things across the gradients, causes the gradient to allows water to move with it. And so water uptake is coupled with what you're taking in. So like sodium. So if you move sodium, water follows it, and that's what the body does here. So they can move across its concentration gradient from sodium back into the body and allow water to follow through with it. And we're going to talk about that with the urinary system. So it'll be a thing we'll see again. Now as you get older, again, everything falls apart. That's the trend with all these systems. So the gastrointestinal tract activity declines with age. So the juices get made a little less efficiently, or not as much. Absorption is not as good. Peristalsis, cannot be as great. Bowel movement issue frequency can become a thing. Also, your taste and smell kind of falls apart, and so you can have some issues with I guess tasting food and enjoying food on that way. Teeth problems, which makes it harder to break down food, begin that process. You can also have other various cancers or diseases that pop up, and incontinence of some kind. Diverticulitis is a thing. Brock Lesnar, shown here, actually suffered from diverticulitis, and it's where you have these pockets form inside the walls of the digestive tract, and the inner linings push through these weak spots and the outer linings, and it causes bulgings of them. Then they get infected, and that's what diverticulitis is. And this happens in the large intestines, and it can be very, very painful and not pleasant. So it can happen as you get older. And then was one of the tricky spots in some of these cancers is they don't always show early signs or symptoms. So one thing you've seen a lot of with commercial things is they're trying to make sure we get better at detecting these things. So it's like, oh, next thing you know, stage 3, stage 4. It's like, oh, geez, that escalated quickly. But they're trying to get better at spotting these things, like colon cancer. There's this commercial I see all the time with Jeopardy where you can like poop into a cup and send it off to a lab, and they can detect it to see if you have like maybe an early warning signs for some of those. Or you can just do colonoscopies, and then go in and look for polyps and things. So that's where you have to be more preventative and proactive to see if you have these. And so if you have colon cancers, it can cause liver cancer. Liver, we know, is a very important organ. So, oof, that's rough. So you definitely kind of don't want that to happen. That can be bad. My uncle, he had a bunch of polyps removed, and he was in pretty rough way as a result of it because there were so many of them. Some of them were pretty large, and so they just cut them off. But like he would bleed internally from that, and at one point he like passed out and had to be taken to the hospital from internal bleeding from it. So you gotta be careful with some of those things. And again, going often can prevent maybe some of those larger polyps from forming. At least that's the hope. And again, nothing's always 100%, but I mean, still, like, a lot of those treatments, those cancers can be treatable if you catch them early. So that's why they always encourage all that sort of stuff. As uncomfortable and awkward as it may be, like, it's supposed to help you, which just kind of sucks. Maybe we'll get a better way at some point in the future, who knows, but that's what we got for now. And then, of course, if you have a mouth cancer, well, go to the dentist to help with that. But dentists be scary. Same time, having a tube shoved up you and with a camera is also pretty scary too. So I don't know what's worse. But yeah. But anyway, that's a downer of a thought. On the flip side, this is a cute little bird with some hair in front of its face, and it's kind of funny. So that's kind of a happier thought. But yeah. So that's it for digestive part 2. This finishes up all the material for test 3. So good luck. You should be able to explain all the elements of the digestive system, all the organs, their main functions, uniqueness associated with them, any sort of structural modifications that we talked about, overall lengths, pathways to the system, when certain macromolecules are absorbed, how these structures play a role. So I don't think it's too bad of a system, honestly, but it can be so tricky with all the terms you have to learn. So yeah, all right. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out. Have a good week.